Hello, I'm back. This is NDE's Reality or Fantasy, and we're going into a part four. This one, I'm going to wander a little bit for the simple reason that I'm touching on a number of things that I haven't done the first three. So if you haven't seen the first three of this series, you would maybe want to get some background by looking at them. So I'm going to take off from where I left off on NDEs 3, which we were getting into some pretty trippy material. Just to say, this disclaimer is I am presenting this in the order of my finding it plausible as a basis for taking this journey from the beginning basic NDE type principles that I've learned and extending further and further into things that are really trippy and sometimes hard to understand. But as I watch more and more of these, I have not personally had an NDE, but I have been researching this for a few years now and watched quite a few hundred NDE videos and read accounts, and I'm kind of gathering what I consider to be the general consensus for many of these. Some things occur very frequently. A lot of people report these things. Sometimes these things are a little further out there where you hear some people reporting them back, others not. And they're not all the same. A lot of people go through the basic NDE where they pass away on a table and, or in an accident scene, and go through a tunnel, go toward the light, have a life review, meet past relatives, meet spirit guides, some meet Jesus, angels. So these are very typical elements. Then we went further along with reincarnation and the basis for believing that, as this is considered a learning planet, a very difficult one. People have free will on this planet, and a lot of terrible as well as good things happen. This is a difficult learning experience. Some people have attested to this being the toughest or one of the toughest learning places to go, and that there's many others out there, and that some of these people, most of them will explain that they're come back here, that home is really the other side, and that there's love, there's telepathic communication, and there's no confusion, there's no languages to have to overcome to communicate, that thoughts are powerful things and they manifest into what we would consider physical, but on the other side, it's all light and energy, spirits, basically, so that things happen very rapidly. We can travel at the speed of light. Time is not a thing in the sense of chronological time here. The past, present, and future are all occurring simultaneously on the other side. So these are some of the groundwork ideas that I'm going to be sort of basing what I'm saying on now. I'm going to just glance at my notes. I'm a little bit scattered this morning. Finally have some beautiful Vermont weather. Got out, did a little bit of hiking yesterday. Very pretty out there with the snow. So what we find on the other side is people that have gone to the other side have met angels and spirit guides. One thing that's interesting is that there is no gender on the other side. It's genderless. And people have met God and Jesus and angels and all. And basically, all the good characteristics of both male and female are in evidence there. We come over here, I assume for purposes of reproduction and such, and being a duality, we are born with a gender. I mean, people sometimes choose to alter their gender or do other things. The body is a temporary vehicle that we're in while we're here. So there's a lot of concern about gender identities and all these very earthly based and oriented things that we take very seriously. And when we leave the body behind and go to the other side, they're non-issues. So I'm not going to express any strong opinion about it. I'm just saying a lot of these things that we put a lot of emphasis on about gender identity and sexuality are kind of non-issues when we get to the other side. And another very basic principle is simply that the God or source that people encounter on the other side is non-judgmental, very loving, doesn't want to lose anybody. So unless somebody deliberately wants to avoid the light and avoid basically God and love and forgiveness, then if they really love evil, darkness, are they going to stay there? That's the takeaway that I get. I mean, the overwhelming amount of love people experience when they get over there and leave the body is overwhelming and indescribable. So it's good news. It really is. It's you know, regardless of religion, religious background, involvement in, yeah, I mean, atheists, people that have never really gotten into religion, people have from every religion that is out there have come to the other side and found that God is loving and forgiving. He doesn't hold people accountable for whether they were in the wrong church or the wrong religion or reading the wrong edition of the Bible or whatever, Quran or whatever they might be reading. Those are earthly issues. They're non-issues on the other side. And ultimately, one of the biggest takeaways is simply that we're all connected. And ultimately, we're all expressions of God and our creator or source, however you want to term it, doesn't matter. People come back and say, you know, we're all one, we're all united and connected. I touched on the idea of quantum entanglement. I didn't get way into it last time. I haven't studied that very thoroughly, but I do see some really interesting, like there's a science in spirituality on the other side. There's science here that's materialistic. This is a material world. So we live in materialism, as it's termed here, and spirituality, where spirit's in a body. We're not just a body that produced a soul and then it goes away when we die. That's not the general consensus, and it's been basically scientifically proven that we are more than a body. You know, the excuses of the body producing the soul and the soul going away when the body dies, and all these NDE experiences being delusions produced have been pretty well disproven by people that have come back from the other side with information they could only have gathered if they were there. That can be proven by, it can be substantiated by facts, discerned by people that were here and were doing, say, working on somebody in an operating room, and later the person told the doctors what they'd been doing, where they were, and what happened in other parts of the hospitals, etc. So it's been quite well substantiated. This is reality. So that's why I'm interested in this study, putting a lot of time into it. Okay, so some of the issues I wanted to touch on. So people go to the other side and encounter family members and angels and spirit guides and various people that they may or may not have known, ancestors, etc., other forms of life that don't look like us. In fact, angels frequently are referenced as being very, very tall, even several stories tall. I mean, much larger than humans. And they're all orbs of light, or created of light and energy. So we don't have any material structures over there, although there appear to be buildings and all these things. And in the last part 3 of the series, I described some of the buildings people have seen over there, libraries, Akashic records that are kept there. So anyway, that's all quite interesting. One thing I want to touch on today is a lot of people come back, and now some people, before they've had NDEs or independently of ever having NDEs, have various gifts that I would say are in the spiritual realm. Some of them have had these things handed down to them from other people in the past that had them. They might have had ancestors that had these gifts. Myself, my mom was very interested in spiritual things, read thousands of books. I didn't put a lot of stock in much of what she had read until I read Ray Moody's book on NDEs, some Edgar Cayce, some other things like that, and began realizing that the Bible is full of accounts of spiritual things. Paul even saying that he had gone to the third heaven, whether in or out of the body, didn't know. And Paul obviously was, I mean, he wrote 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter. And I all of a sudden I look back on that and realize how consistent that all is with what people bring back from the NDE world, that ultimately faith, hope, and love last, and love being the most powerful. And indeed, that's the big takeaway from people coming back from having NDEs, is that they encountered love that they'd never encountered, so beyond all description, a love that causes, and a lot of people have an NDE and they literally, after being home on the other side and experiencing this love, don't want to come back. And the reason many of them do is they're shown what would be the results if they didn't, in terms of who they've left behind. They have kids or relationships that are very valuable to them, or people whose lives would go way off track without their influence. And people will, out of sheer love, decide to come back when they realize they have free will. They have the option of not coming back in most cases. Uh, the only reason they don't, that I gather at this point, is that another thing I touched on in NDE Part 3 is simply that we actually make plans, and what they're referred to as soul contracts very often. These are plans of what we're going to do and learn in the next life. And these plans are made with the benefit of spirit guides and other people. And this is an interesting point I didn't make last time. These planned earthly lives or lives on other planets are designed for us to learn things. And very often there may be things that we've done in a prior life that needed to be corrected, healing that needed to happen, learning that needed to happen, and then the whole idea of dualism of good and evil, and war and peace, and relationship issues. There's so many things that poverty versus wealth, health versus illness, on a lot of concepts that are really valuable are learned here or learned on another planet. And I sort of, my takeaway from this is, because I've actually been dealing with some medical issues lately, is compassion is greatly a product of having suffered. Not that we want to suffer, but sometimes that's what it takes. It's very hard to be compassionate if you've never suffered or had anything go wrong in your life. If you're young and strong and healthy and have access to money and good health, life can be just super easy. And some people do choose to have an easy life, maybe to just take a break from having a tough life. But I mean, there are good people out there that have made a ton of money and give a lot of it away and really do care. Maybe in a prior life they'd suffered terribly. In this life, they decided to give the suffering a break and maybe come into some money or make a lot of money and be generous and share it. Other people are terribly stingy and greedy, and they're here to maybe learn that isn't the way to go. And we see all kinds of people here learning. We have free will. And one of the conditions of coming back and having an earthly life is leaving behind our memories of the past and prior lives and all this stuff. So when we go here, we don't spoil the experience by knowing so much that it isn't real to us. And it sounds a little bizarre that would be, but a certain amount of this information seems to be allowed to leak through. The Bible is full of such things. Other religions have stories that include some of these types of events. And there are mediums, as I was saying earlier, there are some gifts that people come back with from the other side. And in some cases, they may have already had a touch of them, but people come back. Some people come back and because communication on the other side is telepathic, people come back and sometimes have the ability to just telepathically pick up on what other people are thinking, what they're feeling. Like an empath is someone that can feel what other people are experiencing emotionally and tap right into that. In some cases, it's knowledge. When we're on the other side, we have access to vast amounts of knowledge, and people are referring frequently to downloads where they suddenly know things they couldn't know, but yet they were just given information. Or they could see a person and suddenly know their whole life history. And being that there's no time, these things can happen instantaneously. And what appears to be months or years going by really is only seconds when they come back here from an NDE. So there are various gifts. Among them, I'm not going to get into this too far in this particular one. I'm going to do more of these. But there's mention made of auras. And apparently we all have an aura that's sort of a light, I would almost call it a light signature. Like everybody has a color or multiple colors associated with an aura that sort of symbolizes where they're at in the spiritual realm. And these auras represent different things. I might touch on a couple here just to give you an example. I did print out a little bit of material. And this is interesting. This isn't anything anyone needs to know ultimately to be received on the other side or enter into it. This is information that I find interesting. There's a lot of information people come back with that I don't think is essentially necessary. The takeaway usually is it's love, forgiveness, doing kind acts of charity and what have you, and just trying to up the general level of human vibration, they call it very often, like love and positive uh, energy, basically. So an aura is the energy field that surrounds you, and the color of your aura will change depending on your mental and physical state. So now it says here's an example. A yellow aura implies the person is sunny, optimistic, charismatic. Green is peaceful, compassionate, creative. So the auras thing is something that I find interesting. I don't understand it very much at this point, but people report back that it's a thing, and it may be. I'd probably get more further into it another time when I understand it more. But I just touched on that. Then there's talk of chakras, which are uh, regarding various energies in the body and all of that. That's something I haven't gone way into yet. It's interesting to me, and it's been around forever. These things have been around forever, and honestly, they were written off by the churches that I've. Well, the last church I was in was a little culty and poo-pooed a lot of things that they didn't understand. And a lot of the big box churches, as I call them, kind of have rejected things that aren't the standard issue gospel presentation, things that seem new agey. I mean, the new age, I actually, if I find it entertaining, actually. I mean, right now, technically, we're in the age of Aquarius again. It started recently. And I never was big on astrology or any of these things, but there's a lot of uh, talk in the NDE world now of basically a change that's where people are becoming enlightened. So I'm sort of, I'm an Aquarian. I turned 65 on January 31st as an Aquarian, and I was thinking that song Age of Aquarius, which is, would have been poo-pooed as new agey, but it's referencing things to do with the this new age, age of enlightenment. I consider it. I mean, I feel like we are entering the age of enlightenment. That's a takeaway I feel in my spirit, as far as I'm optimistic that humanity is turning a corner and that we are being allowed to experience a lot of terrible things in the earthly plane, wars, the climate events that are occurring, um, especially right now, the escalation of things in the Middle East, the Russia-Ukraine war and everything. I feel like this earthly life is very difficult for very many people. I'm one of the lucky ones. I'm sitting here and behind my computer. I live in Vermont. It's nice here. I don't have a lot of climate problems so far. I'm not exempt. I could be next, but I also feel like, yeah, I'm a privileged person in terms of circumstances. And the earth is very rough for many people in other countries and that are encountering wars and terrible events. So, all of this is providing learning experiences for us. And in the NDE world, when people consult with Jesus and their guides and all, it's basically told to them everything is happening according to a plan. This is the way it's all playing out, and this is the plans that were made by people to go through all these experiences, and therefore it's okay. Don't worry about it. It's not your fault. You shouldn't feel guilty. Don't be afraid. And one of my personal takeaways from all of this studying is I have no fear of death. I mean, the process of death right now, going through some medical things. I hate medical problems. I hate pain. I really don't like any of that. It messes with my mind. And being on the other side where we're not in a body and we're not feeling pain, we're experiencing the love of God. That's a wonderful thing. Between here and there, the process of getting older and dying is quite terrible. If my parents passed, my dad under more favorable circumstances, he gracefully accepted it. My mom was sharp as a whip when she passed away, but her body disintegrated. And at one point she even said, well, it was laughable after the fact, but she said, "I've never been a cadaver before." And she was almost laughing about it. I'm like, man, that's trippy because, you know, but it was something she had to pass through, and she did. Eventually she did pass on. It was quite terrible to go through, but these are things that apparently are educational and make us who we're meant to be ultimately. So some of the other gifts that people have experienced receiving, the reason I mentioned auras is some people have the ability to see other people's auras and their colors, and based on seeing their aura, they're able to discern what condition mentally, emotionally, spiritually the person's in, and it gives them a little bit of useful information in terms of how to react or interact with that person. So that's one of the things. Some people receive gifts of healing. They can discern what's wrong with somebody medically or whatever, and actually help heal them. Um, Clairvoyance, clairaudience, like the ability to see and hear things that normally they wouldn't be able to. Mediumship, again, that was a thing that the church poo-pooed in large measure, but many mediums that I've heard from or of or heard some of the NDE stories from basically said it was a gift they didn't ask for, and some didn't even want it. They would just uh, know things about somebody they without having sought out the knowledge or they're able to connect with relatives, which very often is healing for a person if they lost somebody in an accident or a tragic situation. The person could come back and say, "Hey, I'm okay," but they would go through the medium and say, "Hey, can you tell so and so it's okay? I'm fine," and that has allowed a lot of people to let go of feelings of uh, guilt or whatever. Say their relationship ended on a bad note, or when the person passed away, it was under bad circumstances. They're able to let that go and move on, which is very helpful. Um, so telepathy, some people can read, basically hear what other people are thinking and telepathically get it and understand. That's interesting. Knowledge, people will know things that they would have had no other way of knowing, but it was basically given to them to know a certain thing. Um, Prophecy, and here's an interesting one. There are some NDEs, and right now the NDE movement on YouTube is very big. It seemed like a few months ago I was seeing, there were certain NDE sites that were pretty easy to lock onto, that what they put out was pretty good. First person accounts, people actually speaking into a camera, a microphone, very plausible. I don't know, maybe it's just because I've been looking at so many. Some of them to me are clickbaity, less credible than others. So you have to use some discernment on watching those so that you can filter them. But usually I can I can sense whether they're consistent with the overall picture of what I'm seeing. Uh, so if I hear one that isn't consistent with the others, I discard it and move on. There's plenty of them out there. Um, so about prophecy, some people will claim to have been shown things about the future, about World War III or Jesus coming back or one thing or another. Um, so there's two ways to look at that. One, unless something proves out, I'm not going to buy in. I will take it as entertainment uh, and maybe sound advice if I really feel that it has something to offer or it's consistent with others. But one of the takeaways too is this is a free will planet and things can change. So many people come back and say, yeah, if things stay on their present course and heading, certain things are likely to happen, but it doesn't mean they don't necessarily will. And another takeaway for me, I was going to mention about free will, is Jesus quoted one of the Psalms regarding uh, you are gods. There's a quote, we are gods. And he basically told people that, we have powers that we don't know we have. So one of the good things, we have a lot of powers we don't know we have. And ultimately, a lot of people come back from NDEs saying that we're basically gods in training, that on the other side, there's people that are referred to as ascended masters that may have cycled through a lot of lives and learned a lot and reached a level where they have access to, they know what power they have. They have spiritual gifts. I think one of the gifts we have here that I didn't know about, I feel like a lot of us on this earth have been governed by fear over the years, not knowing, like, there are churches that have put people in fear of judgment, and death, and damnation, and rejection, and all kinds of terrible things. And very often that's, many people say, yeah, that's used to control people. If you keep people in fear, you're going to make them do what you want, unless they realize that you don't have that power over them, and that on the other side, there's love and acceptance. They're not going to be rejected by God. A lot of people come back from NDEs and say, there is no death. There is no death. We're eternal beings. We are part of God. We're all one. We're all connected. So these threats of damnation and death are very strong manipulative tools. And I find knowing that's that that's true has released me from a lot of fears. And now I'm like, wait a minute, I don't have to fear death, and I don't have to fear threats. I don't have to fear damnation. It's like, no, you know, there's different opinions about, I've heard different NDEs regarding, Jesus and redemption and everything, but I know basically we're all forgiven. That's a takeaway. We're all forgiven, and this life is not it. It's not the only life. It's not, we're not going to be discarded or accepted into heaven based on our performance. It's not a meritocracy. We are created and we're eternal and we come back. So the fear of being rejected and thrown out, unless you really want to just stay on the dark side and reject God and be thrown out, you opt out if you want to. You have free will. So, and another thing I'll reiterate, just because it's so powerful, is the idea that, Jesus preached the golden rule, do unto others, and didn't elaborate because it would have messed things up if we knew this. But many people have gone and had life reviews, go to the other side where it's timeless, and they literally relive their entire life or a large part of it and they get to experience it as the people they interacted with, whether they did good or evil. They became those people. So if you're doing terrible things to people, then you expect to inherit that as part of what you experience on the other side. You will become the people that you did bad things to. And on the flip side, if you were a good person and did good and were generous and helpful, you'll be rewarded for that. You will get to live as the people you interacted with and did good to. So that's fantastic. To me, that's the ultimate enforcement of the golden rule, because I felt like that was the only way I could possibly see justice ultimately ever playing out, is if we basically inherited what we had done to others and vice versa, so that when evil was done, it would be returned on the people that did it. That would just seem like hard justice to me, but it actually is in a spiritual sense a reality. So I find that to be kind of a neat thing. But it's also very motivating to consider that whatever you do to somebody else, you're ultimately doing to yourself, and that we're all ultimately connected. So I think that is a really solid basis for being a good person, just knowing that as you do unto others, you do to yourself. It's kind of a do-it-yourself program. Um, what else have I got here? I think I've covered a lot of what I want. Oh, one more thing to touch on. So this life planning process, we interact with very much the same people uh, throughout this whole cycle of life. And very often it's people that we have been married to before, we're friends with before, da 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 da. So when we make a life plan, we're coming back interacting with very, very often a number of the same people that we have in other lives. So we can, and I feel like this sort of explains to me, like some people, I've met people where literally I can meet somebody, talk to them for 10 minutes, and I know I could safely hand them my car keys and my wallet and just walk away and trust them implicitly. How do I know that? Not really sure. Vibes, personality traits that I pick up subconsciously. I don't know, but I mean, that's a thing. And there's other people that I've run into that are totally opaque and impossible to look into, and there's something wrong and you know it. Like your gut tells you this person can't be trusted. Stay away from them. Don't trust them. Look out for them. And, the gut doesn't lie. I've experienced that a number of times where people I'll either really connect with or not vibe with. Some people, sort of in the middle, neutral. There's a lot going on we don't know about, we don't see, we don't remember, and it's fantastic. Um, so a lot of the people that we are interacting with, even now in our lives, we're actors on a stage in a sense, interacting with each other and not realizing that we have shared past lives with. So that's pretty trippy. So my takeaways, I'm just going to wrap up here. So the duality thing to me symbolizes, how we grow and learn. Very often, as adversity builds character, we go through difficulty to gain strength. Sometimes we have to be poor to be compassionate for people that lack money. If we have money, then we need to be generous with it. We learn by being on the flip side, like the duality situations. If we've never been sick, sometimes we'll go through a life. We may have chosen to be sick and go through some miserable physical stuff to learn compassion and be willing to help others. Ultimately, all this boils down to love being manifested. And I feel like the suffering is designed to produce in us love in whatever way it would manifest, whether it's being generous, going into medicine to help other people physically, um, whatever we might do to help others and make life better for others. We're learning those things very often by being in that position where we needed the help. Um, so that's the upside of the negative. You know what I mean? There's negative, the yin and yang thing, the negative and the positive. Uh, in order to appreciate the good, sometimes you got to go through something bad. And even for me, when you lose your health, you realize immediately your earthly life just slams to a halt, and you begin to appreciate what it's like to be able to get up in the morning and have a normal day and do the normal things you've got to do. You can get up and walk and move and eat and sleep. I mean, all these things are valuable, but we take them for granted until they're taken away from us. And then, then we learn. So, and another thing too is the idea of character. I feel like courage versus cowardice, character. The amount of people that I see, and including myself at different points, we all are still subject to being intimidated and put in fear by people at times. And it's a very powerful manipulative tactic. But one of the worst things, in my opinion, just because of my own prior experiences, that on this earth, one of the saddest things is the amount of harm done by people that use the power of fear and intimidation, guilt, all pretty much the whole negative emotional spectrum. I think of as a terrible example is Hitler, able to cause 6 million people to be tortured or killed by other people. He didn't personally kill 6 million people. Nobody could do that, but he used other people to do this dirty work. And most of those people, if not all of them, were governed by fear and intimidation and did the evil things they did because they were afraid for their own lives, which they didn't realize they were ultimately going to lose anyway. And meanwhile, their soul and spirit were being crushed during this process. So the use of fear and guilt and other intimidating things to resist that requires enormous courage. And I'm like, man, to have the courage to stand up and rather be killed than kill, that takes some real grit. And how do we learn that? Well, I think a lot of people are going through things in this life. You do see courageous people like in Ukraine or whatever, fighting for freedom, fighting, even American soldiers going over there to fight, just trying to join a fight for what's right, for freedom, and at the expense of their own life. And it takes a great amount of courage to do these things, to rise up and go against evil. So, I still try to understand like war. How does God see war? How are we supposed to react to war? If you're called into service to go out there and do an essentially dark and terrible thing, killing your fellow man, is it justified? Uh, so that's another big can of worms I'm not going to get very far into here. But these are things I personally want to understand because there's so many lessons to be learned. But I think the development of character very often comes from having to resist that compromise. How many people have been compromised, compelled, gaslit, caused to do things that they didn't want to do or they knew were wrong, and yet they were compelled to do them out of fear. See, one of the big takeaways for me that I want out of this life, one of the things I want to learn is, I want the courage to resist that, because I feel like if we all become strong enough to resist the forces of darkness and resist the compromising and rise up and fight against that and not be controlled and intimidated through fear, we'll be very resistant, if not immune to being, used to do evil things. So life's meant to be good. And ultimately, that's what's going to come of all this learning that we're doing here. So I think I'm going to stop there. We've covered a good amount of material, some things to think about, and things I haven't covered here. I hope you'll come back and we'll cover some of them next time. But I, again, find this very fascinating, the whole NDE study. I hope you're enjoying being along for the ride, and please tune in next time. I will keep you posted, and I'll be putting up some other things for fun anyway. So anyway, have a good day, and I will see if I can tune out here.